Storytelling is always king. That's all that matters to us. And I want to be true to those stories. I want to be true to you guys and really give you something different than you've ever seen before.
Does it feel like James Gunn's DC universe is missing something so far? In many ways, it felt like we were being introduced to a fully fleshed out world, one with parameters, characters, figures, landmarks, history, everything. And yet that doesn't seem to feel concrete yet. It feels, rather than a whole world, we're stepping into somewhere familiar. A lot of people have called Supergirl Guardians of the Galaxy-esque, and there's a reason for that. The aesthetics are all familiar. It feels very lived in, yes, but it feels like territory we've been to. The world doesn't feel complete yet. Why is that? With the release of Supergirl, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding James Gunn's DCU. However, having seen Supergirl, I can assure you the majority of the controversy is overblown. The film is no better or no worse than your average superhero film. I would say it's probably better than most of what Marvel has put out in the last couple of years. Big script issues? Yeah, there are some. But is it the worst script that someone has ever read? No. The Variety review of Supergirl is, quite frankly, one of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. A critic hyperbolically claiming the script is one of the worst things ever, and that critic, I found out later, also said the Minecraft movie was better than Project Hail Mary. That should tell you everything right there. We have to really consider the biases of critics when looking at these films. I genuinely can't take John Campea seriously when he complains about Crypto in the script, because Crypto was an established character in the previous film, and it's a dog. A girl trying to protect her dog is one of the most basic plot lines ever. You don't need establishing scenes to show why someone should care if their dog is hurt.
Crypto gets poisoned really early.
Before you see the connection.
Exactly. And then later in the movie, they do flashbacks to show the bond and the connection between Kara and Crypto. Huge, juvenile, beginner level mistake.
But at that same time, he is touching upon a bigger issue that's a little different, and one I think is more dire in this situation. Something I think kept the film from being successful, because the film is indeed not financially successful. I think in part because Craig Gillespie chose not to adapt some of the incredible visuals from the comics that would have gotten more butts in theaters from the trailers, but that's just my opinion. And that's an individual problem, not a greater problem with the DCU, which is what this video is about. I think Supergirl reveals a bigger structural issue with the DCU in general, one that we're not really talking about because we're focusing primarily on each film as an individual rather than pieces of a cohesive whole. And James Gunn has said that this is ultimately the beginning of a new universe. So it bears the question, how is it compared to Marvel at the same time? The MCU established its universe as well, piece by piece by piece. So how is DC comparing to Marvel? And what structural differences in its world building do we notice already? Let's take a step back. 2008, Iron Man just came out, and we're introduced to a new world. At this point, the Marvel universe feels very much like our own universe, but that quickly changes. We get the Incredible Hulk, which shows the military complex trying to copy other superpowers, the super soldier serum. We have history now, lore. As such, the world has depth because now we have something to look back to. However, at this point, it's mainly our world. It feels very grounded. But then we get a double hitter, Thor and Captain America. And these two films help anchor new points in the universe. Before, we were very much sequestered in the military complex. Iron Man and Hulk both exist in that military complex, but Thor and Captain America show us mythology and history. It expands into the world of sci-fi and space and all that, and it shows us that this has been going on for a very long time. These two decisions to focus on a different angle, a different side of the world, and a different era in our world helps to cement pinpoints. It extends the world so that when we get to Captain America and Thor and Iron Man all meeting up in the Avengers, it feels more complete. All of this helps to cement the world building of the MCU very early on. while it is problematic that the MCU depended so much on events to push things forward, it did feel like the Avengers changed things. One reason I think phases 4 and 5, and to a lesser extent 6, have felt so stagnant is because it lacks these major points and events that changes the world. Phases 4 and 5 are still reactions to Endgame. We're still reacting to the Thanos snap. It feels like we haven't moved very far, and that's a big issue. Whereas in Phase 1, even though the films themselves were not necessarily the best films, it always worked to extend what we knew, to show us a different angle in a familiar place, so that the familiar became larger. By the time we get to Wakanda, and we get to the Kree and Skrull empires, everything feels well explored, to the point where New York City is a new territory for us with Spider-Man. Need a different non-superhero example I'm talking about? Well, fantasy. In Lord of the Rings you have the Shire, and that's contrasted with Rivendell, with Rohan, with Gondor, with Mordor. All these locations serve to offer a different perspective on the greater world. They're all part of Middle-earth, but they're all different corners of it, with different cultures, different lifestyles, different focuses. A good narrative balances these elements out, showcasing different sides of the world while never really losing track of what makes this world so special in the first place. Compare that to James Gunn's DCU. We got Metropolis, we got the government, and we got space. But there's a lot of areas still missing that, while it might be explored in the future, feel under-focused on. When looking at Supergirl, it does establish Metropolis, sure, but it's mostly in space. So what about space does it tell us? It shows us various alien species, various alien cultures, but not enough to really get a sense of what they are. We see cities in isolation. We see planets that are basically bars or hotels. We see barren hideouts for criminal pirate gangs. In fact, the various pirates we see, from Krem's crew to the technological pirates you see in the middle of the film, they're basically just the Ravagers from Guardians of the Galaxy without the heart of Yondu. Without that emotional center to the characters, they kind of feel generic. It's like a whole ship of just Taserface. Krem is basically Taserface if taken seriously.
Your name is... it's Taserface?
That's right.
And now you get why Taserface was made into a joke.
Tell him the name of the man what sealed his fate. Taserface.
While these characters aren't necessarily bad, it doesn't tell us much about the world as a whole. Compare the Guardians of the Galaxy films. In the first film, we're introduced to Nova Prime, we're introduced to the Kree and their war with Nova Prime, and we learn about Nowhere. There are a couple other details added as well, like Thanos and all of that, which gives us senses of factions in the universe. These factions help give us a definition, conflict that's greater than our characters, a setting, culture. In broad strokes, yes, but still a culture. I've been rereading N.K. Jemison's Far Sector comic recently, a graphic novel focused on the Green Lantern Corps, and this comic gives us a very quick exploration of an alien culture that has not been really explored in DC up until that point. It gives us the details very early on, it tells us who these characters are, and it gives us a sense of setting and place. We don't have a sense of setting or place at any point in Supergirl outside the scenes that take place in Metropolis on Earth, or the scenes that take place in Argo City on Krypton, a bottled city in space. I wonder if that would be relevant when Brainiac shows up. The point is that we don't have a sense of who these characters are or where they are in relation to each other. We know the Green Lantern Corps is out there. It might have been fun to have a Green Lantern in Supergirl, just to show, hey, there is still a police force in the DC universe that brokers peace and order in the galaxy. We could have learned about Thanagar in some way, or some other alien culture. We could have had Mongol or Darkseid somewhere. The point is that these alien cultures that just don't really gel with what we know are the main factions of DC. We don't really know anything about the universe at large, outside of it being kind of wacky, kind of Farscapey, kinda Guardians of the Galaxy-esque. And the problem is that aesthetic reigns when plot and world building aren't cementing what everything is. It would be like if Rivendell was just Elf Place, you know? Just a bunch of wacky elves, like the canteen in Star Wars. A common critique of Supergirl when it was coming out was it was so James Gunn-esque. It was so much like Guardians of the Galaxy, apparently. But having seen the film, I can argue it's not, because James Gunn had a better sense of place, and place is instrumental in science fiction. There's a reason that sci-fi stories in general often focus on specific factions. I'm reminded again of Star Trek, how the focus is always on Starfleet and the various cultures that exist in Starfleet or outside of Starfleet kind of interacting with each other. The Klingons, the Vulcans, humans, the Romulans, the Borg. We get a sense of all these characters and their cultures and how they intersect together. While they were one-off cultures and planets that we meet, the big thing is how everything kind of comes together. One of the big plot points of Deep Space Nine is the Dominion Wars, and that's all about different cultures who have been gradually established throughout Star Trek's history coming together in a great clash. However, those cultures are established in smaller episodes of Star Trek. You need those building blocks to build to something so epic. And with Man of Tomorrow being this big confrontation between Superman, Lex Luthor, and Brainiac, we need those pieces together, especially if the Green Lantern Jon Stewart is also going to show up as well. We have a sense of the culture on Earth, different factions on Earth, different organizations on Earth that are pitted against each other, but not really what makes them different all that much. And that's a problem, because if we don't get a sense of these different factions, we don't really get a sense of how everything ties together. What makes all of this more frustrating is how My Adventures with Superman, a cartoon separate from the main DC continuity that's ongoing right now, does a far better job at establishing every separate faction, how they all integrate with each other, and how the greater universe is shaped by their actions. It also does a very good job establishing Supergirl, showing her as a refugee of Krypton, manipulated by Brainiac's machinations. It illustrates how Krypton was destroyed, as well as how Krypton influenced the behavior of the various factions on Earth against Superman. All of this is done very naturalistically and very quickly. Something bizarrely, it takes the live-action films far longer to establish. Which leads to a bigger problem. What factions are being established? Again, the Suicide Squad, Creature Commandos, Peacemaker, all of it establishes Argus and that whole side of the world very well. But even the disparate villains in the Suicide Squad and in Peacemaker and in Creature Commandos, they all feel totally disconnected from the greater heroes of the DC universe, and that's because there are no anchor points in the narrative to tie them together. They're ultimately a bunch of Glupshittos.
A Glupshitto. It's a character from the Star Wars universe, known to hardcore fans but unknown to general audiences. OMG, Glupshitto's back! Whomst? And this word spawned from a Tumblr post, actually, that said, every time a new Star Wars movie or show is announced, all the fans are like, oh my god, Glupshitto's back! And like, no one knows who the fuck Glupshitto is. I use the term Glupshitto colloquially for characters that I don't know who they are, or I don't think that they're very important. You know, scream blow, blim blow, Glupshittos.
One of James Gunn's greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses is his love of the Glupshitto characters. The obscure characters with a small fan base who never would have a leading role in a film, but are always so fun to watch. Mr. Terrific was a highlight of Superman. Peacemaker is a highlight of the Suicide Squad. If I told you the most popular DC character a few years ago would be G.I. Robot for a few months, you would laugh or ask who the fuck is G.I. Robot. This is what allowed James Gunn to take the Guardians of the Galaxy, characters who were frankly unremarkable, unloved, and mostly forgotten about, and elevate them to be icons of cinema and science fiction. James Gunn loves taking obscure characters and making them popular, but there's a trade-off to this. While James Gunn has allowed some characters to take center stage who would never have taken center stage before, he's also neglecting a lot of key, instrumental DC heroes. The biggest issue with the Zack Snyder era, in my opinion, was it was in a rush to bring as many iconic characters to life, to the point where they wouldn't actually develop them sufficiently enough before their introduction. But this is the opposite. James Gunn is taking too long to establish the various main players of his world. In contrast to the MCU, this means the key players aren't being established, and those instrumental bits of world building they brought with them aren't being brought in. James Gunn's DC universe is basically the Superman universe and the Suicide Squad universe. But what about Batman? What about The Flash? What about Wonder Woman? Yeah, you know, Wonder Woman, one of the core of the Trinity. We know Batman's coming, but what about Diana of Themyscira? Where the fuck is Wonder Woman? When you realize that Diana is missing, you realize a big chunk of the world is gone too. Because we have space, we have the businesses, we have the grounded parts of the world, but we don't have mythology. And mythology is a huge chunk of the DC universe. Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, for all of its flaws, did do something very important. It did in one film what Marvel took 2 films to do. It did what Thor and Captain America did. Establish the mythology of magic as well as the history of heroes, the longevity, how far back they go. Wonder Woman was instrumental in giving the DCEU its fleshed out backstory. Marvel was quick to establish science fiction, history, and mythology. Without Thor, there is no Avengers, and the world feels far less complete and far less fleshed out. You don't get those elements because they're not introduced. Imagine if in Marvel you brought in Doctor Strange before Thor. Feels like we're kind of jumping the gun there. Thor is a great transition point between the science fiction of Iron Man and Hulk and the magic of Doctor Strange. If you can buy gods, you can buy wizards and witches, of course you can. It's a good transition point. And likewise, Wonder Woman is a great transition point for mythology in the DCU. Consider how Wonder Woman introduced the concept of gods in the DCEU with Zack Snyder. Now, Snyder's involvement in Wonder Woman is nebulous. He had some ideas that were rejected by Patty Jenkins, and Patty Jenkins' own ideas, as seen in Wonder Woman 1984, don't always pan out with the character all that well. However, in that first Wonder Woman film, we get a sense of the gods. Unfortunately, that film also kills off almost all the gods. So it feels kind of like we're introducing a concept to wipe it off the table, to remove it from play. That's one big issue I have with Wonder Woman, not as a film individually, but as a building block in the greater DC universe. When we get to Shazam 2, which brings gods back into play again, it feels kind of anticlimactic and kind of weird that Wonder Woman has as little of a role in the narrative as she does. She just kind of shows up as a deus ex machina to help out Shazam. And that's not great, is it? The original DCEU had a few big factions that never played together in a way that makes sense. You have Themyscira, Atlantis, Metropolis, Gotham, and that's kind of it for the most part. Yeah, the Suicide Squad shows up too, so again, Argus is there, but it's a constant throughout the various universes now, isn't it? And the problem is, these factions never played together all that neatly outside of one film, the Justice League. And that film is a mess because of all the reshoots and redos and all that have gone on around it. There's no sense of Aquaman or Wonder Woman playing together outside of that. Especially considering that Flashpoint was adapted, a story that does pit Atlantis and Themyscira against each other in a war in the comics. That's not introduced in the film, however, because they'd rather do a time travel plot, which is, I don't know, a little less interesting, I think, than what you could have done with that plot. I mean, Supergirl's in that too, and that was actually worse than Supergirl, wasn't it? The problem is that in Supergirl, we don't get a sense of established place or setting with these characters, and by establishing Supergirl, who's an affiliate of Superman, we never get a sense of the world outside of the Kryptonians. Imagine if instead of Supergirl, we had Wonder Woman. How interesting would that be? It'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Where is Wonder Woman? Outside of the various DC films, we have several animated projects. And of all the animated projects, they all look good and interesting, and they're all going to establish elements of the world that we haven't discussed yet. Where's Themyscira? Now, we know the writer for Supergirl is working on Wonder Woman's script, and that's all well and good. I'm sure it'd be fantastic with a different director than Craig Gillespie, who I think was not the right director to take on this script. However, that seems to me like not enough. Keep in mind, Batman's getting a dozen projects, Superman several also, but Wonder Woman gets one film? That seems weird, doesn't it?
We're doing a television series called Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is the story of Paradise Island, usually known as Themyscira, which is the birthplace of Wonder Woman. It's almost like Game of Thrones with Westeros, but with all of the inhabitants of Paradise Island.
Paradise Lost was announced as a key introductory series in the DC universe, but we've heard nothing but vague gesturing since then. We have no idea if it's coming out, when it's coming out, or who's going to be involved in it. There's rumors of Wonder Woman being cast in Man of Tomorrow, which that would be a great step in that direction, but we're already establishing so much in that movie with Brainiac and bringing elements together like Supergirl and the Green Lanterns and all that it feels odd to slip in something new to reference it. Now again, Creature Commandos does mention Themyscira, it does show Circe, but it does so in a way that makes them feel like just another part of the world, and that does feel very underwhelming. I think Creature Commandos did the best job of establishing different elements of the DC universe outside of Metropolis or Argus, but again, it's animated and it only does so in brief touches, showing and suggesting the greater world outside, without giving a firm sense of place. The fact that G.I. Robot did not show up in Peacemaker Season 2, going into Earth X to eradicate all the Nazis, is kind of underwhelming. In fact, Peacemaker 2 is underwhelming in the sense that we have all this build-up to this multiverse. They show this entire continuity and universe, and it only really feeds into the greater plot by introducing a prison planet for metahumans. That's the big gist of it. That's the payoff. Not that there's a Nazi world that's going to invade Earth or anything like that, but that we have a prison planet that dumps Superman or Peacemaker or anyone else in now. That Argus now has this great prison to isolate metahumans, which is, all well and good.
But we already saw that in Superman. Lex Luthor had one, and now he has another one. Seems repetitive, doesn't it?
But that doesn't give us new things to talk about. It's an empty, isolated prison world that's good for dumping weird characters in, but it doesn't really tell us much about where these weird characters come from. For that matter, I want to bring up another element of Supergirl that's interesting, Lobo. Many people have said Lobo feels out of place, and they're not wrong. He kind of is. He's a weird, fun character for Jason Momoa to ham it up in, and I feel Momoa is better at Lobo than Aquaman personally, though I like them both. But the problem is, we have no sense of place for Lobo, because Lobo is never really established with a sense of place. He destroys his whole homeworld, and he's got like a wandering, edgy parody of an edgy character, wandering from place to place. Lobo is by design not supposed to fit in anywhere. That's kind of his thing. So by establishing Lobo as a primary character in Supergirl, we get another Glupshitto who doesn't fit into an established time or location for us to set up to give us a pinpoint to extend the DC universe. Despite traveling across dimensions and planets, James Gunn's world still feels too small. Smaller than Marvel did at the time, and it had far less to work with. It still anchored Thor in some form of science. It still anchored the magic of the Tesseract in science. So even by phase 1, we're still very mostly sci-fi. Whereas here, we live in a world where magic exists, where the gods exist. We know there's a giant gorilla named Gorilla Grodd who's out there and coming.
Barack Obama, it will almost be an honor to kill you.
But we don't have a sense of any of that yet. Gorilla City exists, cool, but it's very isolated. It doesn't seem like it fits in with everything else.
Time to make America Grodd again.
And a big issue too is that we know Gotham is here, but it hasn't been established yet. Clayface is the next DC film, yes, and that will give us an introduction to this version of Gotham. That's good, that's important. However, that's not enough. We need to have a sense of the wilder sides of this world. I think the biggest prospect for developing DC as a culture is Lanterns. This will give us a sense of who the Lanterns are, where they come from, and what their rules and structure are like. And though it is taking the Thor approach, kind of taking this cosmic world and bringing it down to Earth in the suburbs or in the Midwest, we will get a sense of what does this faction mean to the DC world? What does it tell us about the way this world is structured? Once we have that, we'll have a better sense of where we go from here. But I think it's a mistake not to establish these elements earlier on. While yes, it was true that Iron Man and Incredible Hulk did kind of focus on the same sciencey, militarized version of the MCU, they were still distinct enough to offer different vantage points to the same world. Superman and Supergirl, I think, are just too similar. Creature Commandos and Peacemaker are just too similar. We need distinction. That distinction will help expand this world. Hopefully, Lanterns and Clayface both address this issue of familiarity. I hope they do. They look different and distinct enough to offer us a new vantage point. And while Supergirl I did like, more than most people apparently did, I still think it didn't do enough earlier on to give us a sense of how the world is different. The biggest contribution to lore is Krypton and Krypto's origins. That's about it right now. We don't have a sense beyond that. And once we get that sense, we can finally explore this DC world as it should be. A brave new world of gods and monsters.
This first chapter is called Gods and Monsters. Now, this, what I'm about to tell you, is a part of the first chapter. It's not the entire first chapter.